Welcome back to Algorithmic Risk and Impact Assessments. So now we're going to talk about the goals of these assessments. And in our opinion, the primary goal of these assessments is to identify the potential negative impact to the rights and interests of stakeholders, and with a corresponding identification of situations and or features of the algorithm that give rise to these negative impacts. So this is from our 2021 paper, The Algorithmic Audit, which, despite the name, is actually really focused on risk and impact assessments. So we further went on to talk about in our second paper that after this identification of risk, of course, prioritizing the risks is a critically important goal. So we then assess the magnitude of the potential harm and the likelihood and frequency of it occurring that would result from the algorithm, and take the product of these values to estimate the expected risk for each type of harm. So I think a lot of people would say that these risk and impact assessments should focus both on positive and negative. And I think in general that is true, but we think that the most important feature of these assessments, the most important output, is really identifying those risks, because the positive impacts are typically what's being considered when people try to deploy or develop these algorithms. And that's what's really missing. The thing that has to be factored in are the potential negative impacts. And so both can be considered, and especially in the second phase of prioritization, the potential positive impacts can be factored into these calculations used for prioritization. So what are the goals of these algorithmic risk and impact assessments? Like what are we actually aiming for? Well, the truth is, it depends. It depends a lot on who's doing it and exactly why or how they're going to use the output. So probably the most important or globally true thing is risk mitigation in general. So importantly, it's hard to prevent what you don't recognize. And so if you want to mitigate risk, you have to be able to identify risk. And this is why it is important to also connect that risk with features of the socio-technical system that could give rise to those risks. And so, risk mitigation is sort of the umbrella reason for doing all of this. But there's also other reasons. So internal accountability. Risk assessments can be used internal to an organization to assign accountability. So people who are in charge of features of this socio-technical system, whether it be the algorithms themselves or the user interface or the training. If you know that certain features are important for mitigating risk or could give rise to risk, then you can assign accountability to the people who are in charge of those various features. So internal accountability is also another important goal or potential goal for these risk assessments. Now, of course, there's external accountability as well. A lot of the laws that I talked about in the last lecture are really focusing on this external accountability. So understanding or having visibility into where the risks are within a socio-technical system is important for also figuring out externally who are we going to hold accountable for these potential negative impacts, or when negative impacts actually do happen. So there are two great resources here. If you go to the resource page of the course, one is an institutional view of algorithmic impact assessments. This is a review article. It's not just a review article, but it's in a law journal, and it's very good. It's also very long, but it's a great read. And then algorithmic impact assessments for the public interest. This is a data and society paper, which focuses on, both of these focus on sort of this external accountability aspect. So for risk management, it really depends, or risk mitigation, it also depends on who the assessment is for. So there's a variety of intended users of an algorithmic risk and impact assessment. So who's actually going to look at those and make use of them? So they could be used for algorithm developers to identify and mitigate risks. So this is what, when we ask companies to do these risk assessments prior to us auditing them, the main goal here is that we hope that they're going to identify these risks and actually be able to mitigate them themselves, come up with controls that can mitigate these risks. It's also could be used for algorithm buyers. So if I'm going to purchase, communicating with a vendor and I might want to incorporate their product into my product or to use it in my organization, a risk assessment can be used for me to mitigate my own risks. Now, also regulators might want to assess whether an algorithm meets legal standards. And so in this case, the detail of the risk assessment might matter. So it could be that regulators just want to know whether that system itself needs to be regulated. Is it high risk? Or if it's high risk, they might want to know the details of where does the risk arise within that system. So regulators are important intended party for these risk assessments. And also for external stakeholders in general who have to make informed choices about using, investing in, or engaging with certain companies or algorithmic systems. So people who have to make a decision about whether they want to use that tool or not, risk assessments can be an important part of that decision process. So just like the goals, the outputs can be very different. So, and the outputs might depend on the goal that you are looking for. So algorithmic risk and impact assessment framework can produce a range of outputs, and it will depend on the goals and the intended audience. So, and sort of all of these, we've engaged with all of these types of outputs. So it could be a detailed report. So, the most detail is, a very lengthy write-up of the process of how the risk assessment was executed. What are the results? And sometimes those, it could just be a detailed identification of risks and also the features where those risks arise. But it could also come with recommendations. If this is a consulting contract, we might offer recommendations to them on how they could mitigate those risks by implementing certain controls or changing the way the algorithm is trained. It may be just a summary metric. So it could be just a ranked list of risks, might have numeric metrics associated with it. It could be, so just, number 1 through 5 or 1 to 100 or some probability. Or it could be categorical. So low, medium, high, low, yes, no, something like this. And there might also be more of an audit or assurance kind of opinion. So it might be a pass or a fail or something binary, or an opinion with some sort of qualifications associated with it. And this might happen in the case of potentially auditing to see whether a system should be considered high risk. This is something that this idea has been toyed around in the EU AI Act, for instance, to have an auditor come in, identify whether this system does indeed should be in a high risk category, in which case more obligations will be on that system or the company that deploys that system. So you can have all of these kind of outputs, and it's not, I think a lot of times algorithmic risk assessments get considered, or impact assessments are often thought of as sort of getting high, medium, low, or some sort of pass-fail type metric. But that's not always the case, and I think that's the least useful and the least sort of relevant of all of these. And so what we're going to be doing in this course is thinking a little bit more deeply about how we might think about the really deep dive version of this risk assessment. So important for the ethos of BABL and the kind of work that we've done in the past, sort of the final goal for us, which we think is really important, is to inform further technical testing, because we do technical testing of these systems for bias, accuracy, robustness, security risks. And so this is from our second paper, the choices that must be made when deciding to test an algorithm. So what specifically to test for and how to go about it must be guided by an initial assessment of ethical risk. This is something that we enforce in our contracts. We don't work with people who just want a sort of detached technical assessment of their algorithm. We strongly believe that risk assessments are the first step in doing any kind of evaluation of a socio-technical system. So it is very important for us and the BABL ethos. So what we're going to talk about next is we're going to go through a very simplified framework for doing these assessments. So this is just getting the language. These are the kind of frameworks that we would give to potential audit clients so they could see what's the minimum that they need to do to start thinking about these issues.